Denise. Order. I'm going to call Denise Roach.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I rise to take a call on the annual review of the Economic Development and Infrastructure section of this debate. I'm going to restrict my comments here to the whole area around MB. It's a rather interesting process that we go through to scrutinise the performance of essentially what is the public service as part of our democratic process for the CERT. And I applaud the work done by the public service, and I also think that we need to recognise the pressure that our public servants are under with this national government, coping with the expectations of having to do more with less, which is a consequence of National's persistent underfunding of the public services to give more and more to those who have too much already. Unfortunately, sir, it's the public servants, not only the public servants that bear the brunt, it's also the most vulnerable people in New Zealand. People like our exploited workers and new migrants who deal with the reality of a public service that has to do too much with too little and can't service them properly. And I'd like to talk about two areas specifically, and that's immigration and employment, where our public services are falling short of delivering the core services that they are supposed to because of the lack of resources. Nearly 1 in 5 investigations into suspected breaches of minimum employment standards have not been completed within 6 months of the initial notification by the Labour Inspectorate here. And that's the natural consequence of a stretched Labour Inspectorate. In Australia, they have one Labour inspector to 19,000 Australians. Here in New Zealand, we have one Labour inspector for 58,658 New Zealand workers. With limited compliance checks, bad employers like Nelson's Taste of Egypt restaurant or Masala were able to exploit their workers, paying them less than the minimum wage. In the Taste of Egypt's case, they were paying them for 30 hours a week when they were actually working 70, and they continued to intimidate and exploit these workers even after a Labour Inspectorate visited them. An underfunded Labour Inspectorate and an imbalanced industrial relations climate allow these gross breaches to happen, and essentially it favours employers and National's donor class over ordinary working New Zealanders. If the Labour Inspectorate cannot adequately fulfil the targets set out for it, which is a 90% completion rate of investigation of suspected breaches within 6 months, then clearly we need more Labour inspectors. Immigration New Zealand is also feeling the consequence of underfunding, with nearly 1 in 5 audited visa decisions not being rated as accurate. As with the Labour Inspectorate, we can't keep expecting the public service to do more with less. Overworked public servants are under pressure to meet high targets for processing applications, but they're only human and they're liable to make mistakes. The persistent underfunding of this crucial public service has led to an explosion in the growth of an immigration advisory industry, and some of them, sir, are dodgy. And looking at the data, nearly 40% of complaint cases about immigration advisors have still not been resolved more than 5 months after the first complaints were made. And it's clear that MB is having issues in regulating this industry, sir. And it makes it more perplexing when you consider that the immigration levy has been underspent. In the year 2014-15, the migrant levy collected amounted to $9,979,000, and this is money that's supposed to be allocated to support new migrants to settle here. But only $9,190,000 of that was allocated last year, leaving more than $500,000 unallocated, when so many of the wonderful migrant centres and multicultural associations around New Zealand are struggling for funding and providing useful support. Why is the government continuing to penny pinch the money that migrants actually pay into this country to provide the services for them? Sir, it's clear from the annual review process that our public services are struggling from the strain of having to do more for less.
I'm going to call